I want to just offer a few comments to get started, and then I'm really looking forward to the conversation tonight. Thank you for joining us. I'm looking forward to talking about how Oregon can continue to reopen as a state and get our economy going as we reemerge from the worst of the coronavirus. And it's really nice to see a lot of familiar faces and have the opportunity to update you on some of the work we've been doing since we last got together in this format about 6 months ago. Hard to believe it was that long ago. Back then, we were hopeful that we were starting to see the end of the light at the tunnel. Now things are definitely looking up. We're approaching that 70% vaccination goal. Businesses are opening up and life is starting to feel a little bit more normal. I mean, I even got to go to a Timbers game this weekend and hand out a vaccine award. But the conversation I really want to have today is about where we want to go from here, not backwards, hopefully, really a question of what kind of Oregon we want to build. And I also want to thank my good friend, Ben Bowman, who's along with us tonight, serving as a moderator for tonight's conversation. Now, as treasurer, I'm really focused on the issues that I think Oregon families are talking about around their kitchen tables. How to save for retirement, how to save for education and training after high school, how to bring high-speed internet and jobs and health services to rural Oregon. I know you've heard from me about this before, but I'm really proud of the work that we've done at Treasury in the past few years. We've successfully managed the rollout of a new state-based retirement savings program. It's called Oregon Saves. It's aimed at private sector employees who don't have retirement options at work. We're the first in the country to do this, and I hope you're as proud of it as I am. We've done it in a way that's picked up bipartisan and employer support along the way. And we recently passed a really important milestone. Our more than 100,000 plus participants have collectively saved more than $115 million towards their retirement. And this is quite an accomplishment, especially for people who have mostly never had a chance to save before. Now, one other thing to talk about here, for an average everyday Oregon family, saving for college can feel like an impossible goal. So we've been hard at work trying to make it easier. And for the first time, the Education Savings Credit, the ESC, is progressive and refundable, both important things in Oregon. And it gives us a chance to give help to the people who need it most. A family with an income of $30,000 or less in Oregon, if they can put $300 towards their college savings account, they'll get that $300 back, either through a lower tax bill or a larger tax refund. That means they get their money back. And it means that we put that help in the hands of people who need it most. It can make the goal of a college education a reality for families who've long thought it was out of reach. I want to tell you why that's important and really what's at stake. Just having a college savings account, no matter how much is in it, makes it 3 times as likely for that person to go to college and 4 times as likely to finish. That's also why we're putting $25 of seed money in any account that's open for an Oregon-born baby before that baby's first birthday. We call that baby grad, or same deal for their kindergarten year called kindergrad. Progress like this happens when we are not afraid to tackle big problems. And I want us as a state to continue to do the hard work to move the state forward together. And I want us particularly to get out of our comfort areas and talk to those Oregonians with whom we might not agree. It's way too easy to retreat to our corners and have just safe conversations only. That's not going to get us where we need to go. We need to bring people together around a shared long-term vision of Oregon, one where everyone has a chance at success and where it doesn't matter where someone is from, if it's from Portland or the South Coast or the Umatilla Reservation. This work takes work. It has to be intentional, and it has to it requires of us a willingness to not get it right immediately. We might have to fail a few times before we get it right. 2022, even as we're looking forward through the rest of 2021, is going to be a pivotal year. We know that despite all the noise and distractions that are likely to be out there, most Oregonians just want to talk about the important issues facing our state, how we're going to make things a little easier for their families. They want to know how we're helping with affordable housing and creating good jobs with good benefits. They want to know how we're going to make prescription drugs more affordable, how we're going to improve access to good, affordable childcare, and help move people off the streets and into affordable housing. into stable housing. There are no easy solutions to any of these questions, but we can't afford to let that get in our way. And that starts with conversations like the one I hope we're going to have tonight. I want to hear from you. I hope you'll put your questions in the chat. Ben's going to help us navigate through. We're going to try to get through as many questions as we possibly can tonight. I'm looking forward to when we can do this in person, of course, but this is a good alternative. Allows us to include voices from around the state that might otherwise be hard to gather in person. It's time for you, hopefully, to share with me where you think Oregon should be headed. And I want to thank you in advance for the chance to have this conversation tonight. Now, over to you, Ben. Let's get to it, please.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Treasurer Read. I appreciate the opportunity to moderate this town hall this evening. As Tobias said, if you've got a question, throw it in the chat. We've got staff who's monitoring the chat to make sure we get to as many questions as we can this evening. I first just wanted to start by introducing myself. My name is Ben Bowman. I'm a Tiger Twelve School Board member, but here more in my capacity as co-host of an Oregon politics podcast called The Oregon Bridge, of which Treasurer Read was a recent guest. So with that, Tobias, I want to start kind of more broadly here. You mentioned you were just at a Timbers game. I made a trip to Costco the other day and was startled by the number of maskless faces that I saw, but it does seem like we're turning a corner. And hopefully we're going to reach that 70% threshold, and many of the restrictions will fall away. But the question really is then what happens next? Oregon's economy took a pretty significant hit, and in particular, small businesses have struggled throughout the last year plus. So as you're looking to the future and as you're imagining what Oregon's future might look like in terms of our economy, what should be our priorities and what can the state government do to really accelerate our economic recovery?
Great question, Ben. I think we have to be two parts to this answer for me. I think we have to be driven by data to really see the effect on the communities around Oregon through this experience. It has revealed some stark vulnerabilities, some vast differences in how different communities and populations are affected. And I think that reveals some needed work as to how policies will change going forward. I also think it gives us a chance to think not just about the immediate future, but really to take the lessons of this experience and try to plan for the next crisis. We can make some guesses about what that might be and when it might come, but the truth is we don't know. So we have to be intelligently prepared for as many as we possibly can. It's not just the pandemic. Obviously, in the last year, we also saw some fires. We saw some storms. We've seen the beginning, not the end, of a really long overdue conversation about racial justice. All of these things have to be part of our conversation and how the economy builds. I think, as I mentioned, it has to be around making sure that people have equal opportunity and basing our policies on data that can inform us and direct us towards that aim as a huge part of it. We have some significant opportunities with the dollars that have been directed to Oregon, and thank goodness for a robust fiscal response from the federal government. But I think it's really important for us to use those dollars in ways that can have lasting impacts. And I'm watching, like everyone else, the decisions around the legislature right now and how those dollars are going to be allocated. Even when I was a member of the legislature, even when there was not a pandemic and we were in person, this is the time of the session when things are moving fast and it's not always perfectly clear. So I'm like everyone else on this conversation tonight, watching with really intense interest and in the hopes that the legislature is going to make smart decisions with those dollars.
Well said. And another piece that you've written about, you wrote an op-ed in the Oregonian where you highlighted not just our economic recovery, but the importance of education to the economic recovery. I know you're an ex officio member of the State Board of Education as state treasurer, but probably more importantly for this conversation, you're a parent with a child in the K-12 system. So you experienced what a drastic shift education looked like. Again, hopefully turning the corner in the fall, we've got students back in school buildings. What should we have learned from this pandemic in terms of public education? And in every crisis, there's opportunity to rebuild stronger and better and refine our system. So do you see lessons learned in terms of our public education system and perhaps the interaction between our education system and the more broad economy in Oregon?
deep breath here. Two kids in Beaverton Public Schools, and gosh, you're probably going to have to stop me here, Ben, because I'm going to go on for a while because I do have a lot of thoughts about this. And again, please, let's not make this just a conversation between Ben and I. I could probably fill the rest of the time here, but get your questions into the chat, please. I think the biggest thing is to realize how differently people experience this, how challenging it was for us as a family with a lot of advantages and a lot of resources that not every family does. It was really hard. And so I just have such, I struggle to put myself in the shoes of people who didn't have that advantage, in the shoes of teachers and educators who were trying to meet the needs of vastly different populations without the resources to plan and meet those varied needs. I hope that as we get back to in-person learning, we shouldn't limit our aspirations to getting back to the quote unquote good old days. They weren't so good for lots of people. We should try to take the lessons that this experience has offered. For one, not that many of us are farmers anymore, and I don't know if what reaction this will prompt from an actual school board member, but let's leave this antiquated agrarian schedule behind and move as quickly as we can to something approximating year-round school, to make sure that we're lessening that summer slide. Let's take the lessons of technology and flip the classroom in a way that actually works, so that we can meet students where they are, allow them to move at the pace that reflects their needs, and allow educators and students to work together when the format or the material requires that, a chance to work individually rather than sitting and listening to a lecture at a pace that may or may not meet the needs of the student. The other thing I think is really important, and I've heard this now from multiple school board members in multiple districts, the need for clear guidance from the state. Here we are in June, and I have to tell you, as a Beaverton School District parent, I'm not all that confident about what the experience is going to look like in the fall. But we cannot afford to have an experience like we did in the last year. It is not just as an effect on students and families related to school. That's significant enough, but it has a really direct connection to our economy. The burden of dealing with remote learning has fallen disproportionately on women, and that plays out in the effect on small businesses as well. We've got to make sure that schools are fully reopened safely, full stop. We've also got to do that because of the impact it has on the economy. So I've been looking at the camera, not looking at the chat as much, but it looks like that's generating some reactions. So I'm going to stop there and see if that's causing people to react to it. There's no better investment than in making sure that people, all Oregon students, have access to a robust, safe, and full academic and co-curricular experience. And I hope people agree with that.
Well said. Well said. And the questions are certainly starting to pour in the
Good.
chat. So a lot of questions about healthcare. So first, before we get to sort of healthcare policy, there's a question from Wynn, which I think is an important and very topical question right now, which is, how can we convince people to get their shots? And can we really reopen until everyone does?
Well, I am not a physician, let alone an epidemiologist or a virologist, but what I can say with confidence is that getting vaccinated is just about the best and easiest thing every Oregonian can do to protect themselves and protect their communities and the people they care about. I'm also happy to tell you, if you don't already know this, if you get vaccinated, you have a chance to win a potentially significant prize. There's $1 million prize on the line to be drawn on June 28th. There are 36 $10,000 prizes, one for each Oregon county. And in the Treasury, we've partnered in the Take Your Shot Oregon campaign by helping to facilitate 5 $100,000 scholarships through the College Savings Plan for Oregonians 12 to 17 who get their vaccination. So if you know anyone who is hesitant or hasn't gotten around to it, make sure they know about this. Everyone who gets vaccinated, whether it's now or already, is eligible for that drawing. So we're really hopeful that that will continue to offer motivations for people, and that will be closer and closer to that 70% goal. Although we shouldn't stop at 70%, of course. We can go much beyond that and protect ourselves and the people we care about.
Well said. I think the last I saw, we were less than 45,000 Oregonians away from 70%. So exciting times. Yes. Another healthcare question, kind of a bigger question, talking about the fallout from COVID-19. This is from Lynn. She said, many Oregonians have lost their healthcare when they were laid off because of COVID. And COBRA is too expensive for most working families to actually opt into and pay for. So how can Oregon offer a single payer option so Oregonians' healthcare is not tied to their job or well-being? Lynn doesn't think that healthcare should be tied to employment. Your response to that question?
Well, I think you're totally right, Lynn. The notion that healthcare has to be tied to a person's employment status is really sort of an accident of history. There's interesting stories about how that came about. But in an era like this, when so many people are changing jobs, when so many people are working in situations that don't have a traditional employer, it's really important to have portable benefits. It's healthcare, it's retirement. That's why we've worked so hard on Oregon Saves, to demonstrate that you can have a structure that follows people throughout their lives and doesn't require a single relationship to a single employer. I don't think there's any reason that can't be applied to healthcare as well. And of course, that's ripe for some really rich discussions, but Oregon has a long history as an innovator when it comes to healthcare. And I hope that we'll be able to take the lessons from our other experiences there and apply them to healthcare as well.
Absolutely. A question on housing. This question from Nancy, and I'll provide a little context for folks who aren't familiar, but she says, while Oregon is trying to build new housing for low-income folks, we're also in the process of losing the low-income housing that we already have as owners are moving their low-income housing to market rate properties. This is happening in Tigard, where I live. A large low-income housing unit is being shifted to market rate right as we're trying to expand the number of low-income housing units. Many of the folks who are impacted by this shift are elderly and are expected to be in their last residence. So it's really disruptive for the folks who live in these facilities and have to find a new place to go. Is there anything we can do to keep existing low-income housing low income, as well as build new units for additional Oregonians?
Yeah, this is one of the ways that we can use our financial tools to achieve really desirable outcomes when it comes to infrastructure. I sit as chair of the Debt Policy Advisory Commission, which offers guidance to the legislature about what is a responsible level of debt service. And we've increasingly been trying to add some editorial, some commentary to the numbers and suggest where we can get the best benefit from using debt, and housing is among them. The legislature has also allocated an increasing portion of private activity bond capacity and other support to that purpose. And I think it is really important to use those to acknowledge the gap that has been made clear. And it happens not only just in the normal course of economics, as we're seeing right now. We've seen a really significant blow to the capacity as a result of those significant wildfires last fall. The sort of affordable and workforce housing in areas that were affected by wildfires is particularly acute. So hopefully we're going to get some lessons and some opportunities around that when we can build back affordable and workforce housing in ways that are more resilient, that are lower cost, that are more energy efficient as well. But it takes resources, and I'm happy that the legislature is making that a priority, and I think we'll be able to continue doing that. There's also obviously a really immediate need when it comes to rental assistance. The moratoriums are coming to an end, and as we sort of make that transition back to quote unquote normal conditions, the legislature has stepped up in some significant ways in terms of assistance both to tenants and to landlords. And I think we'll be able to put some links to those resources in the chat if they are of use to people here, or to spread the word with other folks. This is really, it's hard not to feel significant empathy for people who are in this situation. Just how important it is to have a place that you can rely on to deal with all the other challenges that are in front of us. So housing has to be a priority for us.
Absolutely. And some of those resources Jessica has put in the chat, and I'm sure she'll continue to. We got another question. This question is from Stephen, and it's going back to the question of small businesses. Stephen says, everyone loves to point out the importance of small businesses in Oregon, but one of the reasons why COVID has been so hard on them around the state is that state and other local municipalities don't have buy local programs or prioritizing of their budgets. How can the state build trust with small businesses if they don't even prioritize buying from them? So could you explain a little bit what buy local means, and then respond to Stephen's question?
Yeah, I think it's a good observation, and it speaks to the really multiplier kind of effect when you can circulate dollars within a local community. I think it's really short-sighted sometimes the way procurement policy emphasizes lowest cost when the real question is, what's the total impact? Even if it costs a little bit more to buy from a local provider, whatever it is that a government needs, there can be significant benefits to keeping those dollars circulating inside a local or a regional economy. I talked about this at the beginning of the pandemic when we were really at that spot of trying to find creative solutions. I suggested that maybe at least for a short time, we should reduce the emphasis on lowest cost and try to increase the emphasis on total positive impact. There's lots of ways that Oregon, I think, and other local governments can do that. And I think it has a powerful effect when government can create the market for products, for services. When we can provide those locally, it also allows local employers to hire people and to set the norms for what that job experience might be like. It might stand in contrast to some other employers and provide a much preferred experience for people who are seeking work, building businesses, and building the resilience of the supply chain at the local level as well.
Well said. A question from Tom, something that you and I have talked a lot about. Tom is concerned about the urban-rural divide, and he says that the urban-rural divide in the state and the forces driving it are making many Oregonians want to join the state of Idaho. There seems to be at least two issues here. One, the rural areas resent the majority of the population that live in cities, so there's less focus on rural needs. And second, the city dwellers don't seem to understand the needs of the rural populace. What can we do to decrease this divide?
I think we need exchange programs, and if not actual ones, let's create some virtual ones. Let's create some mechanisms for us to stand in the shoes or in the fields or in the streets of our neighbors. The reality is that despite the fact that we are a very big geographic state, we're a pretty small state by population, and we are all connected, whether we know it or not, whether we like it or not. Our revenue structure guarantees that. The way that we fund the things we care about is so almost entirely dependent on the income tax. And we ought to remember that a success in Burns is no less important than a success in Beaverton. In fact, a success in Burns can go a lot farther in terms of its impact on the local community, and that extends to the rest of the state. So we are all connected. And I think at the most base level, we all understand that the things we want are the same. We want our families to be healthy and happy and safe and nearby, ideally. These are the things that we ought to remember when we're tempted to think about things that divide us. That can start by just looking for those opportunities to connect with someone. As we get back to the normal life that allows us to travel around Oregon periodically, take that advice from Stephen. Get off the highway somewhere and don't go to the chain restaurant. Go to the local restaurant. Look for places to support those local businesses and communities that you don't know as well. The other reason I think we can be really aware of our connections are the wildfires. We're all affected by the same kinds of issues. Even a fire that is far distant within Oregon can affect other places in Oregon. I don't think anyone will forget the experience of last fall and the color of the sky and the quality or lack of quality of the air. We are connected, rural and urban. The decisions that we make in each part of the state have effects on everybody else. So I think it requires each of us to talk about it. It requires each of us to look out and reach out to the people that we don't yet know.
These are excellent questions, and they are continuing to come in the chat. Thank you, Jessica, for monitoring those. We got a couple of questions that wanted open the answer. And the first one is from Mary. She says, this may not be within your job description, so good caveat, Mary. But her daughter lives in Portland and her local public school is not earthquake safe and is rated poor as to its overall condition, built in 1912. She's very worried about sending her young children there and if the building will collapse in the event of an earthquake, which, as if you've read the New Yorker piece, you know that a large earthquake is expected at some point. We don't know how soon, but it is expected. Mary wonders, how can it be legal to place children who are required by law to be in school into an unsafe building? And is there anything you can do as state treasurer to address this concern?
There is. As a legislator and as treasurer, I have been a pretty steadfast advocate for using bond capacity to address seismic risk in schools and other public safety buildings. That's been a consistent approach from the legislature, and I wish it were faster, but we're working on this. The other thing that we've done in the Treasury is to try to be an example. We needed some new office space for Treasury, and we are under construction now for a new Treasury building in Salem that we're working with a number of private sector partners. It's going to be one of the first buildings in the country, the first one in Oregon that receives a platinum rating from the U.S. Seismic Resiliency Council. So we're trying to be an example of how we can be creative and build facilities that do this. It is an issue. It is it's a true statement, as you said, that children deserve to be in safe buildings. There's also a significant community benefit in the event of an earthquake. Those schools, in addition to keeping kids and students safe, can turn out to be a really important asset for the community in the wake of an earthquake. So that's an excellent investment, especially in a time of low interest rates like this. The ability to build physical infrastructure that's going to have a really long life, that's going to benefit a lot of people, is something we shouldn't miss. So I hope the legislature is going to increase its commitment to those kinds of seismic rehab projects.
Absolutely. That will make many school board members happy across the state. That's for sure. Another education policy question from a fellow education policy wonk. Andy says, you mentioned year-round school or something closer to it as one potential reform that you're interested in. Are there any other changes, maybe 2 or 3 other education policy issues that you think should be priorities?
Well, I think one of the most interesting things, and you're please weigh in here too, Ben, is this notion of how to rationalize the fact that the majority of school funding comes from the state, but the majority of decision making is at 197 locally elected school boards, and sometimes that results in some inconsistencies. I mentioned earlier, when I've been talking to school board members around the state in the last few months, they have indicated a real desire, a crying out, really not much of an exaggeration there, for some consistent and definitive guidance from the state to think about what the fall is going to look like. I understand local school boards are caught in a spot. You know, they hear desires from their local students and families. They hear maybe something different from the state, and I think trying to rationalize and synchronize that setup is going to be really important to giving school districts the ability to pursue their mission in a way they can count on, so that they're not bouncing back and forth. I think an emphasis on formative as opposed to summative assessments to allow educators and schools to adjust to the individual needs of students over the course of a year is going to be important, and an increasingly nuanced and flexible role of technology as we're all learning about how to do that in this remote year needs to continue into the more traditional setting next year. So Ben, you ought to weigh in on this too.
I think that's really well said. I've got a very wonky issue that I think the legislature should tackle that will probably put folks to sleep. It has to do with the current service level calculation and how we determine what it costs to provide the same level of service in future years. Basically, the people who run schools, our CFOs, administrators, have one formula for calculating what it will cost, which I believe is the accurate one. And then the legislature has their own process for determining what the current service level will be, which they have to accommodate for massively different sizes and districts and different conditions and different salary schedules and, PERS benefits, et cetera, et cetera. But what happens is we end up with some districts who have major budget holes because of budgets passed by the legislature. And the reason why I think it's important, in addition to the impact for students, is it sucks up so much of the oxygen. If you read the newspaper, if you read the newsletters from education groups, they're fighting about this budget issue rather than talking about what Andy is thinking of, which is what are the innovative education policy solutions we can talk about to reimagine our education system. Instead, we're quibbling over what it's going to cost to just do what we're currently doing. So that's my very easy to solve problem that the next legislature should look at. We've got a couple of really interesting questions. One that I want to ask is about the kicker, which I started as a legislative assistant back in close to 2010, and it was a big issue back then. People were talking about kicker reform. I imagine this was a hot topic when you were in the legislature. Lynn says, how can we rethink the kicker and use it to fully fund the needs of Oregonians? We deserve fully funded agencies and schools, but we're letting these funds escape from the Treasury because some do not want to pay taxes or fully fund our agencies. They call foul government overreach when the state moves in the direction that offers these resources. So do you have any thoughts on kicker reform and if there's anything we can do?
I do. I have a lot of thoughts on this, and it may surprise people to hear me say this. I always start this answer by saying I think that the kicker does one really important and good thing, which is to prevent us from spending money we can't count on. It's just that from my perspective, the flaw is sending it back out when we know that somewhere down the road we're going to need that. So I would prefer that those dollars be kept in a tightly defined, tightly regulated reserve fund. We have those in two forms, two rainy day funds that have a whole series of requirements to be met before they are accessed. And I think we could do that. I think it stems from a lack of confidence in how tax dollars are spent. So we have some work to do to help people gain the confidence that they would like to have in order to support a change. It's quite old, but I remember some polling data that suggested one possible solution to this. Of course, it would require a vote of the people because it's in the Constitution. But you could say that everyone gets their full kicker up to some number of dollars, $250, $500, pick your number, and that everything over that goes to the reserve fund. The interesting thing that results there is two counterintuitive things can happen simultaneously. Most people would get their full kicker back, and at the same time, most of the dollars would go into the reserve fund. That's true because so much of the dollars, so many of the dollars associated with the kicker are at the upper end. So that might be one possible solution to that. But I want to point out two interesting things that happen with the kicker that are sometimes not thought of. It's obvious that having a more robust set of reserves allow us to better negotiate the ups and downs of economic cycles and budget cycles. We were, even before the federal response, we were in a much better position in Oregon because of those reserves than we would be without them. That's a credit to the legislature for making those deposits diligently over the last several years. But the other thing that results from robust reserve funds is an improvement in our credit rating. We have, this is something I think about a lot, interact with the rating agencies. We have a good credit rating in Oregon. In fact, one notch below the top rating in each of the three major agencies. But one of the reasons, and there are three, that rating agencies point to as to why we don't have the top rating is the kicker. One of those things that does not promote stability and predictability. So that would be a benefit. And I have to share one other kind of funny thing that's happening right now. I hear from some school boards and leaders asking about when we're going to receive the next chunk of federal support, and expressing some understandable urgency about that. And I sort of sheepishly have to point out that there is a downside to that. We got to wait another week or so, because we don't want to request that money and have it come in this biennium and add to the kicker. So we got to wait, which is silly. But maybe I conclude this long filibuster with the words of a former treasurer who said, "There's dumb, there's dumber, and then there's the kicker."
Dumb, dumber, and the kicker. So it hasn't come up, but it's I think a very timely topic that I got permission from Jessica to ask you about, and that is wildfires. It is really hot outside in almost every corner of this state. It looks like this weekend we're going to cross 100 degrees in a lot of Oregon, including in the Willamette Valley. And there's a lot of predictions about this wildfire season actually having worse conditions than last year, where we saw, millions of dollars of economic damage, lost lives, smoke, billions of dollars. Oh man. So I believe, I don't know, I'm going to get the title wrong, but I think it was the Wildfire Economic Recovery Council that you were the co-chair with Commissioner Hoyle. You traveled the state. Hopefully you say it again.
Virtually, yes.
You virtually traveled the state. What can you tell us about what you learned there? Should we expect another really rough summer? Do you feel like we're more resilient than we were last year in terms of infrastructure? What should we know? What should we expect?
So much to say here. We're woefully underprepared. What we are still dealing with, I think, is the aftermath of the fires that we saw last year. And we really, we're so vulnerable. And I don't know that we're a lot better off now. I think we're still kind of climbing out of what's there and trying to assess the lessons. The legislature has a couple of packages in these last few days about recovery and about policy changes that hopefully will put us in a better position going into this next season. I think it's really important for us to be willing to make those investments. The truth is, we were set up for an era of fires that seem to be gone. No longer can we count on a manageable number, a manageable size, a manageable intensity of fires, and we have to recognize that. We have to be prepared to fund the agencies in a different way. We have to think about policies in a different way. We have to think about adding to the resilience of communities and proactive approaches that are going to be part of that discussion. It's big dollars too, and I don't think we're going to get to all of that this session. It's also going to require a change in mindset for all of us who care about forests, to think of them as living organisms. And I'm not a biologist, but there is a lot of good evidence to suggest that a proactive approach with some managed burning can reduce the risk in really significant ways. That there's a policy bill that's the subject of some ongoing negotiation in the Senate right now, in the Oregon Senate, that could play a really significant role there. And I am looking forward, once we get out of the session, to finding some ways to go out, not just virtually, but physically, to the communities that have dealt with fires over the last several years, and they're vulnerable to fires coming up, so that we can hear more about the real and everyday impact. But again, to go back to the early comment, all of us should care about this, whether we live in those settings that are directly vulnerable, or those that are just looking at smoky skies, because this is not going away. Our climate is changing. It has already changed. It continues to change, and we're going to have to deal with the realities of that going forward.
Thank you, and no thanks for that last answer. It's scary. I really am. I know a lot of folks are worried about. I just moved into a new house with really old windows, and I'm concerned about another summer of smoke where we're going to be breathing that in. Not to mention the impact that it could have on our schools as we're trying to get our students back engaged. But hopefully, we can make those investments and be in a better place over the next 5 to 10 years. So a sort of broader question involving tax policy from Christine. Christine prefaces her question by saying, My question is Oregon still a quote best place to live? After the passage of personal income tax ballot measures in Multnomah County and the Metro Service District, studies are showing that Multnomah County will now have the nation's highest or among the highest income taxes in the country, and Oregon's business taxes are continuing to climb the national rankings. What are your thoughts on how to influence tax policy and funding important public services and community infrastructure needs while continuing to attract businesses that employ middle and upper middle income earners in Oregon?
I think this is all about trying to create confidence and creating value for money so that people feel good about what they're getting. It's understandable that I don't know anybody that thrills to the idea of paying taxes. I know a number of people who are willing to do that when they feel like they are getting value for that. And we can have lots of debates about what the best investments are, the best ways to pursue those things, but we all need government. It exists to allow us to do things together that we couldn't possibly do individually. And there are good things that these taxes are supporting, but it doesn't, it's not enough to assert that. We have to have conversations with people so that they feel confident about that. Whether Oregon is on a list of best places to live, is subject to the methodology and to the authors of those lists. But I think all of us can find things that we love about Oregon, things we're frustrated about as well. But it's up to us to talk about the things that are great, and not to ignore the things we're unhappy about, but to look for ways to be productive in advancing the conversations about that. I'm not accusing anyone here, or even the person who asked the question, of being a downer on those things, but there are sometimes too much of that conversation and not enough about what we can do productively to move things forward. I do think we have to recognize, as was it Benjamin Disraeli who said, taxes, or Oliver Wendell Holmes, I think it's also attributed, taxes are the dues we pay to live in civilized society. It doesn't mean we have to agree with every piece of it, but it does mean that we are obligated, I think, to participate and try to make them most effective and most efficient.
So we're going to do a couple more questions and then I'll hand it back to you to wrap. But there's just some good ones that I don't want to miss. Greg asked an important question. I'm wondering if this came up on the Wildfire Council. How is the state engaging Oregon's tribes to learn from their historical and cultural fire management practices?
It is a good question. I appreciate that, Greg. We do have those conversations. We have to respect the sovereign nations, the tribal governments, and engage in that government-to-government consultation, as we often do. It illustrates, I think, the tension too of allowing or even promoting prescribed and managed burns. That's something that I think we are increasingly coming to recognize as a powerful and effective tool in forest management. Not everyone is as comfortable with that, but the experience of tribes in doing that for a very, very long time is something we should make sure that we are incorporating into the conversation. I have to say also that kind of thing can really be an important part of research that I hope is going to be part of the Elliott State Forest. We're continuing to have the discussions about how that forest can be transferred to Oregon State University. We had tribal members on the Wildfire Economic Recovery Council and engaged in those conversations. I hope we'll continue to do that.
So final question, I want to ask about racial justice. And, we've talked about a lot of different items in terms from economics to education to healthcare. And what we know is that Oregonians of color experienced disproportionate impacts from this pandemic across different facets of society. And what we're focusing on tonight is rebuilding and the recovery. So what should Oregon do to ensure that the recovery is equitable across all facets of our society, from education to healthcare to the economy?
Just a small question to end on. I think we have to be driven by data. This experience revealed some really troubling realities. And I like the way you put it in the question. It would be really hard to find some aspect of daily life where that inequity is not revealed. You mentioned education, you mentioned economic development. Those are two that are constantly on my mind. And I think we have to start with data and try to design and drive policies that are aimed at addressing those inequities. For me, it's a really simple and almost selfish motivation in a sense. I want everybody to have equal access to opportunity. I grew up playing sports. I still like watching sports, and there's an analogy there for me. Why would we field anything less than a full team? There's talent out there. There are ideas out there. The solutions to problems, new products and services and ideas are out there. They're in the minds of people that we don't know. Talent is distributed equally, but opportunity is not. And we've got to use the data that we now know to look for, if we didn't know it before, to help inform and design policies in every aspect of our discussion. If we're not doing that, it's not only wrong, it's really foolish.
I think that's a really excellent way to close out our conversation this evening. So thank you to the questioners. These were excellent questions, high caliber questions. And it's been a pleasure to be with you this evening. And I will hand it back to Tobias for some closing remarks.
Ben, thank you for doing this. It is no stretch to say that the quality of the conversation would be a lot less without you and without our really high quality audience and high quality questioners. I would put this audience up against any legislative town hall I ever got to do or participate in, and I bet you all would exceed any other state treasurer's town hall. So thank you for being part of it. As I mentioned at the beginning, I think this really is just one example of what we've got to do more of. It's a hot night, so maybe that helped, but you're all really kind to spend some time on Zoom. I think everybody here needs another Zoom meeting like they need. Well, you can fill in the rest of the sentence. We've all done plenty of this, but your willingness to invest some time with me is really appreciated. And I hope this is not the last conversation that we're going to have. Lots more to come, I hope. So please be in touch. I think Jessica's putting our contact info in the chat, but you know where to find us. And I'll look forward to our next conversation. So have a great night, everyone. Thanks so much.